I'm Katie from What Katie Did and welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about the controversial subject of whether you should wear a corset after giving birth. This came about because I was actually doing customer service on our website a couple of weekends ago, and I had a lot of you guys asking me whether you should wear a corset after having a baby. So I thought I'd do a little video from my perspective. I actually gave birth and had a baby 15 years ago, and how I'm going to break it into a couple sections of firstly how it impacted both my body and my mental health, and then going on to the history of why people binded their torsos after giving birth, and thirdly moving on to whether you should do it today or not. Firstly, when it comes to corsets, and if you're a fan of corsets, you'll know that it's quite difficult to get a definite answer from the medical profession as to whether you should wear corsets, and the general consensus is no. The reason behind this, and it kind of ties in with being pregnant, is most of the studies done about corsets were done in the 19th century. Less women wear corsets now, and there have been no medical studies at all, so there's nothing recent to say as to why you should wear a corset or shouldn't wear a corset and what impact it has on your body. Basically, the doctors play it safe by saying no. And when you're pregnant, you're kind of in a similar situation. I had very, very bad hay fever when I was pregnant, and I kept saying to the doctors, listen, there must be something I can take for this, because it's really, really bad. And in the end, my doctor said to me, my doctor was great, and my doctor said, well, we can't test the drugs. They said, you can't actually test, hay fever drugs on a woman who's pregnant. Just in case anything goes wrong. And they said that, if a drug's been around for 50 years, then you've got a pretty good idea that it's safe and you can take it. But just like with corsets, when it comes to taking drugs when you're pregnant, there's actually no research. You can't actually test drugs on anything, so you don't know whether it's safe or not. And the same with corsets. There's not a big enough amount of people wearing corsets post-pregnancy, and there's no research done, so to play it safe, everyone just says no, don't wear one, which is quite a bit ironic really, because when it comes down to it, the short answer of whether I recommend you wearing a corset after pregnancy, no. I don't really recommend it, because I think the payoff you get from wearing a corset isn't really worth it. When you give birth, your body changes dramatically, which is quite an obvious thing to say, but when I was pregnant, I was quite into, well, I still am quite into alternative medicine, and you read all these baby books and they say, you're not really in pain, it's all the way your mind thinks of it, and it turned out to be a right load of hogwash. It was, there was a lot of pain. I had a great doctor I've mentioned before. My doctor said, just take the drugs. Just take the drugs and everything will be fine, and you don't feel you have to go through a natural birth, you just do what's right for you. But when you read the books about being pregnant and everything, it's very much that you put on about 30 pounds. The first 7 pounds you lose when you give birth, the baby comes out. The second 7 pounds comes out when you lose water weight, and the third 7 pounds comes, you lose that when you're breastfeeding, and after a month everything's back to normal and everything's fine. And that turned out to be totally untrue in my case. So you can see the attraction of, a couple months after giving birth, you expect everything to be back to normal, because that's what the books say. This is what the media says. This is what women in magazines appear, that everything's fine and everything's back to normal. So you can see that you might look at wearing a corset just to hasten things along, and for things to go back to normal quicker. So you can see the appeal of wearing a waist trainer or a corset to speed things along. Having said that, your body does go back to normal after a amount of time anyway. Yes, your tummy will be softer for a long time, but your body will gradually return to normal. When I was pregnant, I had a plan, a great plan. Didn't involve corsets. My amazing plan was to wear full skirted dresses, because I thought, well, if I wear something quite closely cut to the waist, then I can wear a big skirt, and whatever happens below the waist doesn't matter because no one's going to see it. And what I didn't realise was that when you're pregnant, your internal organs are pushed up into your ribs, and your ribs actually expand. So my plan fell to pieces when I put on one of my full skirted dresses, and my ribs didn't fit in. And I never thought at the time, that your ribs would expand that much. But they do go back in. And when you look at wearing a corset after pregnancy, it's like, yes, it does put pressure on your ribs, and it would squeeze them in faster than if you weren't wearing a corset, but your body is going to return to normal anyway. Yes, wearing a corset or a waist trainer would slightly help your body going back to normal slightly faster, but really it's, at that time in your life, you got more important things to worry about really than just having a slightly smaller rib cage, especially when your body's going to go back to how it was before eventually anyway. When you look at the history, or when you look at women today wearing corsets after pregnancy, it's definitely not a new thing. It's only since the mid-20th century, or later than that, possibly the 60s moving on to the 70s, that women stopped wearing some kind of supportive garment after giving birth. In the Victorian times, of course, they would have worn a corset. So we think today, of course, it's being all about emphasising the waist. That wasn't necessarily the case. The case for corsets in the 19th century, and that was more about supporting the torso. So women at that time would be spending a lot longer of their time of their lives being pregnant and post-pregnancy with their bodies recovering. So you can see that wearing a corset wasn't necessarily about defining your waist at all. It was just about supporting your body. So after having a baby, you'd be supported either by wearing a corset or by wearing a girdle, and your day-to-day lifestyle would be a lot more physical than it is today. When you look at simply like doing or washing all the clothes by hand, that would be a physical job. You'd be a lot of bending over, a lot of movement within your body. So you can see how it would be more important for your body to have some kind of support. Simply, the way your muscles are separated when you were giving birth, or you needed to support with your back and things like that. You needed the support where we don't necessarily have that lifestyle today. It's quite interesting. I was thinking about this the other day, that when women stopped wearing girdles and shapewear on a daily basis, this is actually when they started definitely working full time. The cars, basically everyone had access to a car. All the mod cons like washing machines and the housework became less physical. So I don't know whether the two are linked at all, or whether it's completely separate, but it seems quite interesting that women stopped wearing shapewear and girdles at the same time when all these mod cons came in to actually make their lives less physical. So they didn't have to have kids and start doing all this physical work. They could actually give their bodies time to recuperate naturally. There is still a fashion in poorer parts of the world for women to bind their torsos after pregnancy, and this goes back to what I was saying about having a physical life, about having to actually bind your torso to give your torso support so you can actually get onto the activities which you have to do, which of course in the West now we do have time to allow our bodies to return to normal and give ourselves time to recover. When I gave birth, I knew it was going to change my body in dramatic ways, and I was totally prepared for that. What I wasn't prepared about was how it was going to affect me mentally. My career has always been very, very important to me, and I've always loved what I've done for a job. And when you're pregnant, obviously you get people, there's the stories about people coming up to you and saying, when's the baby due, and prodding you and all this stuff, and that was fine, and I expected that, and I was used to that. But when I gave birth, suddenly you kind of lose part of your identity. It's a huge change for you, and also it's a huge change for your partner, and I really wasn't expecting that change at all. And I changed from Katie to Mum. You have the nurses come to your house, and you are now Mum, and everyone's fussing about the baby and you are now mum. And this continues right up to, you know, when your child starts going to nursery or school, is that you are now mum, you are not a person. And I can remember quite clearly when my daughter first started school, and you no longer get asked what you do or who you are. You get asked what does your husband do? Because of course, A, you have a husband, or B, you have a partner, or C, you know, they just presume that you're married, and you lose a big part of your identity. And I can remember going out, we had this mums group, and we had a get together after everyone had given birth, and I was all dressed up, and my now husband, we weren't married when I gave birth, but we are married now. He was like, "Oh, you're too dressed up to go out like that," and you know, I felt, you know, it was the first chance for me to actually feel like me again. So I can see why, you know, women would want to turn to wearing a corset or a waist cincher, because it's something that it gives you control over your body. It gives you something to be you again, because you might not be able to fit into your clothes. You suddenly, you know, if you've got like a proper job, obviously I was self-employed, so I could still work from home and still have that sense of identity. But if you are at home, you're kind of cut off, and you are now mum, you are not you. And by wearing a corset, it may not be anything to do with the physical side of it, it may be to do with the mental side of it, as it gives you some kind of control over your body and some way of moving back to how you were before. So if you are thinking about whether you want to wear a corset, you want your body to return to normal, and you want to have control over something, you need to think seriously if that is the case. Because if that is the case, yes, it's totally understandable, but of course it really isn't going to help. It's looking at inside, what's happening inside your head. And I'm not saying it's a mental illness as such, but I'm just saying you need to be aware that it is a hugely stressful time for both you and your partner, not just physically but mentally as well, because as I said, the way people perceive you kind of become slightly invisible. And you might want to say, oh, if I wear a corset I'll be glamorous and I'll return to normal and I'll be me, but in reality it's not the corset, it's what's going in your head that is the thing that needs to be addressed. And you need to really take the time and be kind to yourself and your body, and look after yourself and really think what's going on. Why do I want to do this, and will it make a big difference? Because when it comes down to it, it won't. Your body will gradually return to normal. It might be, you might be lucky, you might not. I can definitely tell you that your tummy will be softer for a long time afterwards. Obviously, if you go on to have a second baby, then that will make it softer still. But you will get to accept your body as it is. Things will get better physically and mentally. You just need to give yourself time. So in summing up, do I recommend you wearing a corset after pregnancy? No, I don't think in the West it's necessary at all. I know the Kardashians and everyone, they recommend waist trainers after giving birth. Years and years ago, Agent Provocateur actually did a line of waist trainers. This is before it even kicked off. This was years and years before, because obviously they'd looked at what was happening in the rest of the world, and they did this garment. They did a post-pregnancy, they did breastfeeding bras, and they did this torso binder. And the story behind it was because other women around the world wore them, and there is truth behind. There is a reason why people actually wear them, and they didn't do that. They didn't get a lot of outrage, they didn't get a lot of press, and they quietly stopped doing their post-pregnancy range. But it's nothing new. The whole waist binder thing after pregnancy is nothing new. As I've said, it happens around the world. Women wear them around the world after giving birth. Are they going to damage you? Probably not. You need to give your body space to recover naturally, as opposed to worrying about really how you look. And I know that's difficult, but really it's just taking things slowly and taking care of yourself. Of course, if you're wearing waist trainers or corsets before giving birth, you might want to wear one simply because, you know, your body's used to it, and you know that's fine. But you do need to think seriously about why you want to do this and what pressures you feel under as to why you want to wear a corset. So if you do have any questions about corsets or waist trainers after pregnancy or any other time, please get in touch and I'll catch up with you soon. So take care.